The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus put before the crowd another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the grain and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of humanity. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Humanity will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. Good morning. It's a good morning. It's a good morning because I get to talk about Jacob. Jacob, one of the ancestors of our faith, one of the patriarchs of our faith. In the Old Testament, we hear about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And that's the Jacob that we read about this morning, the Jacob whose story we find in the book of Genesis. As the story comes to us, Jacob is the grandson of Father Abraham and the son of Isaac. To understand Jacob, we need to remember that Jacob is Israel. It is Jacob to whom God chooses to give the name of God's people. You may remember that it's after Jacob wrestles with the angel that perhaps was God, that God chooses to give the people a name through his servant Jacob. And he gives this name Israel, which means striving with God. So the foundation of this model of discipleship that Jacob gives to us is found, I believe, in this dream that we read about this morning. The dream that Jacob has of the ladder from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on that ladder. In Jacob's model of discipleship, heaven and earth are connected. All that is good and true and pure in this life is intricately connected with the realities of our daily lives, the reality of life on earth, which isn't always good and true and pure. All that is ideal is connected to the reality of what it means to live day and day and day. In this life, things can be messy. Things cannot always go the way that we planned. But if we can hold together this tension of the purity of God with the reality of our lives, Jacob tells us that it's right there, right now, in that tension, that God will fulfill the promise that he makes to us, the promise that he made to Abraham and to his ancestors. And even more than that, God promises to be present with us, right there, in the middle of heaven and earth. So this model of faithfulness that Jacob gives to us is summed up in the entirety of his life. Jacob, within Genesis, is considered what folklorists tell us is a trickster character. He is a character like Brer Rabbit, like Coyote in Native American folklore, who is not averse to tricking and deceiving and doing whatever is necessary with his wits to overcome any obstacle. We see this in Jacob's life. He's born grabbing, he's a twin, and he's born grabbing the heel of his brother Esau. And he eventually goes on to steal Esau's birthright, to steal his blessing from his father. His brother's the oldest son, but Jacob, with the help of his mother, tricks the father to give that blessing to Jacob. And then, as we said before, at the pinnacle of his life, the climax of his life is this wrestling match with God. He's constantly finding ways to trick and to deceive and to do whatever it is necessary to live and to have life in its fullness. Now, Jacob is often compared to his grandfather Abraham. Abraham is a different kind of character. He is the archetype of the obedient servant. You might remember God says to Abram, "Leave all that you have, take your wife and a few belongings, and go into an unknown land." God asks this very difficult thing, and what does Abraham do? He says, "Okay, God, I'll go." Then a little later, God says to Abraham, "Take your son, your beloved son, and sacrifice him." And what does Abraham say? "Okay, God, I'll do it. Here I am." Not so much with Jacob. Jacob isn't following obediently the will of God. He's more often running away from pickles that he's gotten himself into. He's lying and cheating and doing anything he has to do to get out of a tight spot. But even in the midst of all of that, Jacob's model is a model of faithfulness. It's a different kind of faithfulness, one that's persistent, gritty, determined, and persevering. He just keeps going, no matter what. And even in that life, amidst all those struggling and wrestling and all the other stuff, it's right in the middle of that God blesses him. And God says to him, I will keep my promise to you. It's not on the mountaintop. It's not in a set-apart place that's calm and peaceful and holy, but it's right in the middle of life. God is keeping the promise. And that's what happens in our reading this morning. Jacob is running away. He's fleeing his father's house because he's just stolen his brother's birthright, and Esau is furious. So Jacob is running away, and he's running, and he's running, and he comes, and it gets dark. He's out in the middle of nowhere. He takes a stone for his pillow, and he falls asleep. And then he has this dream of a ladder with angels ascending and descending from heaven to earth. And then God speaks to him. And God says to him, I will fulfill the promise that I made to your grandfather Abraham. I will give you this land where you are sleeping. I will give you many descendants. And not just that, I will be a blessing through you. I will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Then God goes on and gives a very particular promise to Jacob. I will not leave you. Wherever you go, I will go with you. And I will bring you back to your father's home. I will not leave you until the work that I have promised you is complete. God is saying to Jacob, you can run away, but I'm running with you. So it's interesting to have the story of Jacob paired this morning with this parable that Jesus tells us about the wheat and the weeds. Father Jim last Sunday introduced this section of Matthew's gospel where Jesus is telling us parables. And in this parable, Jesus is trying to explain what the kingdom of heaven is like. So like Jacob being Israel, this parable is what it is like to be a disciple, what it is like to be the people of God. And it seems that like Jacob, Jesus is saying to us that the kingdom of heaven on earth has room for both the wheat and the weeds. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, is like a man going out and sowing wheat in a field. And then, while he is asleep, the adversary comes and plants weeds. Now, Jesus goes on to say that that adversary is the devil, but I would say that that devil, that adversary, is just life. It's the complexities of life. It's the difficulties and contingencies that we face in our everyday lives. The weeds are planted right there along with the wheat, and they grow up together. So as the crop begins to mature, the servants see that there are weeds among the wheat, and so they go to the farmer and they say, well, should we pluck up the weeds? And the farmer says, no, give it time. Let there be more maturity in the crop before we determine what is wheat and what is weed. There is time for a patient, confident attitude towards this crop, knowing that the time will come when it is clear what should be harvested and what should be thrown away. We don't want to prematurely weed the crop, for we might, in that process, pull up some of the wheat as well. So inherent in both of these stories of Jacob and the weed and the wheat is the idea that the final judgment is not ours. We don't know how this is going to turn out. And it is not for us to make that judgment now. Instead, we can rest in confidence that the wheat is indeed stronger than the weeds, and that a time of harvest will come. We can rest in confidence that God's promises can even be fulfilled through imperfect, deceitful, flawed human beings. That even they, even we, can be bearers of God's promises for the world. So our task is to be patient, like the farmer, to let the crop mature, to wait until the time when it is right to separate the weeds from the wheat. But our task is also to be like Jacob and to keep on keeping on, to be persistent, to be gritty, to persevere, to stay engaged in every moment of life, even when you look around and see all those weeds. To be persistent, because we can receive God's blessing in the midst of every obstacle. You know, I take great comfort in this model of Jacob's faithfulness. Remember that he wrestled with God. He wrestled with the angel. And in the middle of that wrestling match, it became clear that Jacob might lose this thing. But Jacob doesn't give up. Instead, he grabs onto that angel and he holds on. And he says, "I will not let you go, God, until you bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me." God desires from us that same desire. I will not let this thing go until God works the blessing that God has promised. So we need to hold on with confidence that the time of harvest will come. If you're anything like me, you look inside yourself and you see a lot of weeds growing. And sometimes you look around at the people around you and you think, where did these weeds come from? Or maybe you look around the world and you see conflict and people suffering, and you think there are a lot of weeds in this world. Maybe it's an uncertain diagnosis. Maybe it's a tenuous job. Maybe it's a risk that you maybe should not have taken. A broken relationship. Our lesson today is to hold fast with patience and persistence, and to rest with confidence that at some point in our journey, the time will come for the wheat to be separated from the chaff. Hold fast. Stay engaged. For we know that the angels are ascending and descending on that ladder to heaven. Thanks be to God.